in my life, especially in Ireland. Water has a lot of these very special spiritual and symbolic meanings. And the picture right here is actually a drawing that my mom did, and she incorporated water into her work all the time, and she was an artist, so I was constantly exposed to that as a kid and seeing that. And so I always had this kind of special place for water in my heart, literally and symbolically. And now, but it wasn't until coming here to New Mexico in which I began to learn about water, and with the embedded knowledge and kind of history that lives in it through traditions and through its connection to culture. Especially in the desert, water is it's what allows life to thrive here. But the reality is there are things like drought, there's urbanization, sprawl, contamination that is threatening water today. And so if we really want to continue to have these thriving communities, thriving generations, and have water, we need to have these discussions about what are kind of effective ways to defend water right now. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about kind of the state of water in New Mexico, and then focus on acequias as kind of this really important asset that we have here in New Mexico. And then I'm going to go into details about ideas I have for future work. Give me one. So currently in New Mexico, like Kenya mentioned, there are 1,000-year droughts. And so this is coming too with declining snowfall and rising temperatures. And so it's highly decreased the region's water supply. Right now, the Rio Grande reservoirs are at 25% of storage capacity, and Elephant Butte down in southern New Mexico is only at 6% of storage capacity. And a lot of these issues of scarcity are only worsened by kind of these political and industry forces that are very prevalent throughout the state. So there's here in one of the neighborhoods in Albuquerque, the recorded approximately 24 million gallons of jet fuel spill were leaking outside of these pipes from the Kirtland Air Force Base into the soil and going towards the aquifer. And then we also have the Dine water supply is contaminated by nearby abandoned uranium mines, and not a lot is being done. And then additionally, Bernalillo County here in this region in Albuquerque just recently approved the first stages of the construction of Santolina, which is a 38,000 home development that they want to build right here in New Mexico, and it's going to use about 20 billion gallons of water per day. And so this kind of is reflective of a lot of lacking state support to protect water and defend water in this region. So like Alicia said, Susana Martinez vetoed 90% of acequia funds, and that was like an estimated $1 million funds that was meant to go into repair and kind of improvement to the acequias. And additionally, New Mexico lawmakers recently pulled out funding for a working group that was meant to look at impacts of drought and was kind of tasked to outline recommendations. However, so that looks very bleak, especially in the desert. However, New Mexico has a really incredible and important asset in the form of acequias. So if you look at this aerial view of Albuquerque, you can see the desert, you can see kind of the brownness, but this is all green, and that's where the acequias are. So you can see where the acequias are, where water is, there's light. And it's really amazing. And so, the next one. So acequias really, they possess several important characteristics that represent very effective ways of managing water. But I also am focusing on the acequias because to me they provide this very useful way of looking at effective water management, or looking at ways that we should think about water in our lives, in our communities, and think about water for the future generations. So I use these words, they're from Juan Esteban Arellano, who's a very respected acequiero and scholar and just teacher here in New Mexico who recently passed away. And he said acequias use the wisdom of the land and knowledge of the water. And so they're a part of this 1,000-year-old global irrigation system, and they're traced back to the Islamic law of thirst. So that means that no living creature should be denied access to water. And so what's really unique about acequias is that they are a collective form of water distribution. So there's this communal, community aspect that's just intrinsic in all of the acequias. And they're also, repartimiento is an important concept of the acequias, and that means water distribution based on the fundamental principle that water is essential to live and that it has to be shared for the common good. So this embodies the belief that water is life, that it's a response to water scarcity that values the community it serves, but also the water itself. And so when we see, like, oftentimes water resource management in the county or like privatized corporations talk about water in this very commodified way, like we need to focus in on the belief that water cannot be separated from community. And that so this is like this necessary perspective that we need, that we can learn from acequias, that in order to strengthen efforts to protect it. So not only does that value water as this life-giving resource, but it also shows that this aspect and this emphasis on community is kind of nice, yeah? It's also a resistance to kind of all of these capitalist attempts that try to package and sell water, which really is not the way it should go in this future. And so we need to emphasize that an abundance of water means that communities, food, tradition, and culture can continue to thrive. And another important value associated with the acequia culture that Alicia mentioned is querencia. And querencia, defined by Juan Esteban Arellano, is a love of place. So that sense of place defined by the texture of biting into a recently plucked green chili, the smell of tortillas cooking over a piñon fire on my grandmother's old wooden stove, the color of a ripe tomato waiting to be sliced. So, like Alicia said, it's that which kind of grounds you, which gives you, instills within you this love of a place. And so the ingenuity to construct the acequias and to work with them implies this very more intimate interaction and connection with the gravity of the water, the formation of the land, the way the soil works, and the way it collects water. And so this is the love and tradition that anchors us to a land. And in order to have this land and this place, especially New Mexico in the desert, we need water. That's what we need to survive. And so this querencia helps you kind of value the sacredness of water, and it maintains that connection to the natural world that makes up our home. And so with that, it instills within us this very important sense of respect, and then kind of a duty to protect it, which kind of leads me into my main kind of what I want to focus on. So what I'm really interested in is community-based efforts to defend water. So if you look at kind of recent events, like what happened in Flint, Michigan, kind of what's going on in Bernalillo County with where they approved Santa Lina, that housing development, sometimes the government isn't the most accountable. But there are these amazing examples of people working more intimately with the community that they know, that they come from, to protect water. And so, like, the acequias are kind of, to me, they embody that drive to emphasize community as it is related to water. And so, to me, these kind of are these approaches that implement a place-based approach with a closer understanding. So we have several initiatives here in Albuquerque, like we got El Agua Sagrada that CESOSS started, and so they're using all these different events, the acequia walk and talk, like we have here, and the legislative session to kind of discuss the importance of water and the acequia traditions. And then we also have Sunflowers for Change, which is a really amazing kind of community-led effort in the International District. And what they did is they came together and to address the Kirtland Air Force Base jet fuel spill that was going on in their community that was getting closer to contaminating their aquifer. And they used local knowledge to use about native plants to try to extract those toxins from the soil. So there are these ways of kind of using the knowledge that we have of being closer to our communities and the people around us, but as well as just the land and the water. And so unfortunately the internet's not working, but what I'm working on is creating an online database of different community efforts that are defending water. So these include, so far I have Sunflowers for Change up there in El Agua Sagrada. And so my goal for this is so that people can look to this as a resource, so they can see kind of like if they're like discontent with things going on in their community, like there's waters being contaminated or that like water rights are being grabbed up, people can look to this as a resource in order to like be empowered and not have to rely on legislators or not have to rely on privatized companies that, you know, like oftentimes still have corruption or may still have kind of ulterior motives in it. And so what I have are videos so that they're easy to distribute, they're easy to see, and they kind of have this narrative-like quality. So, because really thinking about the future and what is to come, like these are kind of the stories we really need to tell, and need to tell them like they're heroes, you know, not that they're like the real superheroes in our communities that are doing this work. And so, we can go on to the next slide. So, like, considering the current realities of water, what's to come, we not only need to focus on more community-centered, place-based approaches that incorporate local knowledges, but we also need to have this ideological shift where we start to value water as kind of this necessary and precious resource that allows just our communities, our families, our traditions to survive. And so other recommendations would include maybe incorporating curriculum or programs into the school where students at a very early age can start to learn about acequias or agriculture or just water in general. And so now that they are incorporating ethnic studies programs into APS, this could be something to consider when in the curriculum development phases. And so, because above all, what we need is this increased appreciation of water as kind of the veins. A lot of people call them the veins that bind communities together. And so I want to conclude with some words by Juan Esteban Arellano, who I mentioned before. And he said that when we forget that sacred knowledge that bonds water to community, humanity disappears. So that's something we need to keep with us and remind ourselves of. So thank you.
What, in your opinion, is the human rights to water?
Sorry?
I said, what, in your opinion, is the human rights to water for Albuquerque?
The human rights of water?
Human rights to water.
What is your opinions for
Do you think there is
human
one?
rights? For water.
Like that everyone, what do you mean by the human rights of water?
So the right that just everybody in this community, like, is it more of a group that everyone has the right to water on an individual basis? Should it be a more national approach, or should it be down to each community's right to decide who has clean, accessible access to water?
Well, I think the very unique thing that, kind of the unique asset that this region, especially New Mexico, has with the acequias, is that it traces back to the Islamic law of thirst, so that that essentially is that no living being should be denied water. So there's kind of a human right to water, but not necessarily in kind of these big institutions like the United Nations or the government, you know, which oftentimes that can come with kind of an empty promise. Like, we know that everyone has the right to education, everyone has the right to clean, like, good food, water, but sometimes that doesn't really happen. And so on this grassroots local level here, there's kind of this awareness that there should be this collective kind of right and like ownership of water just as intrinsic to the community. And it's not even, what's really beautiful about it that I've learned, which has really been really valuable, is that it's not just this thing that exists outside of us, but it's in the food that we eat, it's in our bodies, it's in just all of, like, everything. And so it's not, oftentimes when it's looked at this right, looked at as this right. It's seen more as kind of a commodity, a way. And so, I don't know, I think looking at kind of the traditions and the culture here, that human right, kind of in that vocabulary, it kind of exists on this grassroots, more local level, but not necessarily within from these big institutions like. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Okay. Okay, I have two. Is that another one of your moms?
Oh no, this is Virginia. Do you know who this is again?
It's a really old piece. It's like from the 1950s, I think.
Yeah, and that's supposed to be an acequia, isn't it?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and the second one, I'm curious about the database you mentioned about, and then how maybe you see ties with Amicia talking about like sharing calendars and this mutualismo effort. Do you see the database as something like that? Like,
Yeah, I would really love. I didn't mention. My vision for it. Not only is that it's this resource, but also that it's a place where this dialogue can happen. You know, where people can talk about. Come from this asset-based approach because it's so easy to look at water as drought or scarcity. But in New Mexico, like they have the acequias, but then like even in Flint, you know, like you had the Union of Plumbers, they came in and they changed out the pipes, you know, just for free. And so these are all these different assets and gifts that people have kind of more on a grassroots local level that people can learn from, you know. And so it's like this unique knowledge that comes from just that just more intimate connection with where you're coming from, the way water manifests itself in that setting and in that context. And so yeah, the way my vision for it, I want to like keep learning from other people, incorporating that, is so that people can look at different like issues, for example, contamination, and see different kind of ways people have responded to that, or contact, so people can like connect with them or talk to them. Even like, for example, in the housing development I mentioned is actually funded by Barclays Banks, and so, which is crazy here in New Mexico. But there are also kind of research that shows that it's possible they're doing that in other places where they're trying to grab up the water rights in other places. And so these can be like these great coalition building efforts where people are like, oh, Barclays is over here, and they're here, and they're here. And it can just be stronger, and like people can build off one another with that mutualismo in mind. So yeah, it's cool.
Jenny, before you go with the question, can you let people know what your URL for the
Oh
site?
yeah.
They can write it down and look it up.
Oh,
So
okay.
they can check it out there, because that was a major part of your project.
Yeah, It's still in the works, so, but it's at Jennie, Jennie, Greb, Greb